children's week sequence in the 1960s, Toy Fair, and you can see it at 4:10 this afternoon. Now, News Afternoon on BBC1 with Richard Whitmore and Moira Stewart. It's 1 o'clock.
Good afternoon. Friday's headlines. The Western banking system could be on the brink of collapse. That's what a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Denis Healey, says. The Health Secretary meets the nurses. Will he have any more money to offer them? The sappers return from the Falklands and tell of the menace of the mines.
And we hear for the first time what the Argentine airmen thought of the British task force. Fiddling on the dole, a junior minister tells how the Social Security investigates to save the taxpayer millions. And those daring young men in their microlights set off for France.
First, though, Mr. Denis Healey's warning this morning that there could be a collapse in the Western banking system. Mr. Healey, a former Chancellor and Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, said that for the last 3 years, governments in the West had turned a blind eye to the consequences of their deflationary policies. Speaking in London, Mr. Healey said next week's meeting of the International Monetary Fund may be the last chance to save the world from a catastrophe even greater than the slump in the 30s. The world recession, Mr. Healey continued, had been created deliberately and had caused unemployment to rise remorselessly, even in countries hitherto immune. The human tragedy and political danger of these self-inflicted wounds, he said, are obvious enough. But all this could be compounded in the coming months by a collapse of the Western banking system, unless the IMF acts when they meet in Toronto next week. Here's John Sargent.
Mr. Healey isn't saying that the world's banking system will collapse, but he's giving a clear warning that unless the rich countries act together in the International Monetary Fund, there's a real danger of this catastrophe taking place. The former Chancellor sees the problem simply as one of rising bad debts by countries facing the same difficulties as companies in paying for their loans. He takes Mexico as an example. On the promise of its enormous oil wealth, it amassed debts of $80 billion. But with oil prices nothing like as buoyant, it can't pay its creditors on time. It would need to borrow another £1 billion every week just to pay the interest on those loans. And if you look at the figures for all the oil-producing countries in OPEC, you get the same picture. 2 years ago, they had a surplus on their trade of £70 billion. And now it's a deficit of £30 billion. And of course, for some other countries, the crisis is far worse. Mr. Healey says many third-world countries face the prospect of economic collapse, political anarchy, and mass starvation. It affects communist and capitalist alike. Poland and Argentina are now in the same boat. Mr. Healey has issued warnings of this sort before, but he has never been so specific about the shortness of the timescale which could be involved.
Well, we hope to be able to interview Mr. Healey later on in the programme.
Nurses' leaders have been meeting the Health Secretary, Mr. Norman Fowler, to tell him formally of their rejection of the government's 7.5% pay offer. The nurses voted by a 2-to-1 majority to turn down what Mr. Fowler has called the final offer. Leaders of the Royal College of Nursing, including its General Secretary, Mr. Trevor Clay, went to the DHSS this morning to press upon Mr. Fowler a strengthening of their members' resolve in their campaign. Well, our reporter Phil Jones is at the Department of Health and Social Security headquarters in South London. Phil, how's the meeting gone between Mr. Fowler and the nurses' leaders?
It's still going on. It began, I think, about an hour and a half ago, in fact, and obviously they've got a lot to talk about. It's the first time that the nurses have actually had a chance to meet Mr. Fowler since they turned down the 7.5% offer. This is the improved offer that was given to them. They're suggesting to him that there should be an independent mediator brought in to judge the issue. And they also suggest that the rest of the action within the health service should be called off while those talks are going on. Well, the talks here are still going on, and obviously within the Royal College this is going to fuel the debate about whether they should have the right to strike. A lot of people think that they should. In the meantime, the TUC say that they're planning guerrilla action within the various unions that are affiliated to them, and they should have a day of action on September the 22nd. The nurses are suggesting to Mr. Fowler at this moment that the talking should go on, and should go on immediately. When we have more about this meeting, we'll come back to you.
The TUC has called on all its 11 million trade unionist members to support the Health Service Workers' Pay Campaign by staging stoppages of an hour or more on September the 22nd, the day set aside by the TUC for a one-day strike by all workers in the health service unions. The call was made at this morning's meeting of the TUC General Council in Brighton. 8 health service workers arrested 3 weeks ago on a picket line outside Halifax Infirmary have been remanded on bail on charges of obstruction. The 8 are members of the National Union of Public Employees, and this morning 500 of their colleagues and sympathisers marched through the streets of Halifax in protest.
What do we want? 12%! Why do we want it?
Local MP Bob Cryer was among those on the march, and the number was called by other supporters.
Police in Oxford have released more than 100 of those arrested in yesterday's elaborate operation against alleged social security frauds. Special courts sat late into the evening and 172 people were charged, mostly with obtaining money and benefit money by deception. It's alleged that they had no fixed address but claimed to be paying for their accommodation, which made them eligible for an extra £50 a week. Police say that more than £1.5 million may be involved. Today, members of the Claimants Union, which represents unemployed workers, demonstrated outside the DHSS offices in Oxford. The union has criticised the police for detaining many genuine benefit claimants and infringing their liberties. But one of their spokesmen was asked if the police operation wasn't to the advantage of genuine claimants.
Well, obviously it would be, I mean, we're not condoning massive fraud, but we don't consider that vagrants and down and outs who prefer to sleep rough rather than live in abominable conditions should be condemned. Some people have made a lot of money, and it's those that the police should have concentrated on, and they could have done that without holding large numbers of innocent claimants, including those who are asthmatic, epileptic, taking away their medication, refusing to allow them to contact a solicitor, and photographing them illegally. And we feel that operations of this kind detract from the fact that large numbers of claimants do not get the money that they are entitled to, and that they have very great difficulty. They're waiting in Oxford 3 or 4 months because staff are continually being cut at this office to get the money that is theirs by right and theirs by law. And unless the DHSS makes a decision to start treating claimants as innocent, instead of treating them as guilty and as sponges all the time, that frauds are going to continue.
The Department of Social Security, of course, has its own team of investigators to track down fraudulent claims. And I've been speaking this morning with the junior minister at that department, Tony Newton. Mr. Newton, are you able to gauge how much fraudulent claims cost your department each year?
Well, frankly, no, we can't make an estimate of the total cost, but what we do know is that the activities of our fraud and abuse staff taken together are estimated to have saved well over £200 million in the last year, for which we have full figures.
So presumably they are earning their money. How many people do you have involved?
Well, taking various different categories of people, we have something like 5,500 staff employed on various aspects of the work against fraud and abuse. And the latest estimate we have is that they're saving something like £45,000 each per man year in their work.
What sort of people mainly are guilty of this sort of thing? For example, are they individuals, or is there evidence of highly organised gangs?
Well, you'll understand that I can't comment in detail on the particular case which has led to today's stories. It may well be that there is a degree of organisation in some cases, is as much as I could say, but there's certainly a great deal of individual abuse, and I would guess that that is the majority of it.
Has this problem grown with the recession and the numbers of unemployed?
I think, frankly, it's likely to have done, simply because the number of beneficiaries has grown, and that even if the proportion of fraud and abuse had stayed the same, the amount would have risen. It's obviously one of the unfortunate effects of the recession that the number of people on social security benefits has risen.
Can you give us, without giving too many games away, an idea of how the department works?
Well, it works in various ways, because there are various different ways in which abuse can arise. In some cases, it's people who are not genuinely seeking work. That we would categorise as abuse, and there are various other forms of abuse. When it comes to fraud, it's people who are working and not declaring that, for example, or people who are claiming benefit to which they're not entitled, as in the current allegations. And obviously we tackle the different problems in different ways and according to what information comes in.
Abroad now, and following the total rejection by the Israeli cabinet of President Reagan's new Middle East peace proposals, the American Secretary of Defense, Mr. Caspar Weinberger, is on his way to Egypt. He spent 2 days in Israel for talks with the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Begin, and the Defense Minister, Mr. Sharon. However, the opposition Labour Party have generally welcomed the peace proposals as a basis for discussion. After his meeting with Mr. Begin at the holiday resort of Naharia, Mr. Weinberger termed the Prime Minister's immediate rejection of the proposals as a first-shock reaction. The plan calls for Palestinian self-government in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip and a halt to new Jewish settlements there. The Israeli government sees the plan as a threat to the country's national security.
The Employment Secretary, Mr. Norman Tebbit, was given an angry reception at a school in Swansea last night when he came to speak in support of the Conservative candidate in the Gar by-election. The trouble started when the caretaker, a member of NUPE, took industrial action of his own by refusing to allow Mr. Tebbit into the building. David Williams has the details.
Mr. Tebbit was kept waiting for 15 minutes when the caretaker refused to open the door until the advertised time of the meeting. Demonstrators, who included health workers, took the opportunity to let him know what they thought of their pay offer. The caretaker, Mr. Len Thomas, eventually opened the door to everyone.
Will the NUPE members please come inside so we can at least have a little meeting? There's not many of them, so you may as well come inside to try and fill up the 300 seats they requested.
Police refused to allow the demonstrators into the meeting, but Mr. Thomas was adamant that it should be open to the public.
It was booked. I was assured this afternoon that this is a public meeting and you are members of the public. As far as I'm concerned, I am a caretaker of an educational establishment that has been booked this evening.
The local education authority announced today that it would be holding an inquiry into the way the meeting was handled.
The Home Office say they're concerned about the condition of a 54-year-old man who's been on hunger strike in Bristol's Horfield prison for 39 days. Mr. Alistair Munro is refusing to pay rates on his house. Tina Jenkins reports.
Alistair Munro was sentenced to 90 days in jail for non-payment of rates at the end of July. Since then, he's consumed nothing but liquids. Mr. Munro is taking his stand over this property in Portishead near Bristol. It used to be a shop, and the local council are still charging rates based on its commercial value. But Mr. Munro and his wife say that's not right, and they've each been to prison 3 times over the issue. Mr. Munro has already lost more than 2 stone, and his wife says his condition is quite grave.
He's very weak, and he's very tired, and yesterday he said to me, "I've had it now, So I think he's accepted that he can't do much more now.
Mrs. Munro feels she's the one who should be in prison as the property is in her name. She says her husband is prepared to die unless the long and bitter battle is settled quickly.
The men of the Royal Engineers, who had one of the most difficult and dangerous jobs in the Falklands, clearing unmarked minefields, returned home to Brize Norton this morning. Not only have the sappers suffered casualties during their mine-clearing work, they also lost 2 men during the attack on Sir Galahad.
It may have been the last big homecoming from the Falklands, but the scenes of reunion were as emotional as ever. A mixture of laughter and tears, and of course the inevitable champagne.
We proved, I think, that all the training we do in peacetime was absolutely the right training, and I had nothing but admiration for them. They worked extremely hard all the way through in pretty bloody awful conditions.
You also had the problems of clearing the minefields afterwards, which must have been very dangerous.
Well, it was only really when we got into Stanley that we realised that the Argentines had laid an enormous number of minefields in and around Stanley, some of which were marked, but a lot of which were unmarked and unrecorded. And of course they were using plastic mines, which are undetectable with the equipment we've got at the moment.
How safe is the island now then?
Not safe at all. I mean, in the process of clearing mines, 3 of my soldiers had feet blown off. 1 Argentine prisoner that was helping us had his foot blown off. Really, in the last week, we've had an armoured bulldozer destroyed on an anti-tank mine. And the whole area, particularly in and around Stanley, is extremely dangerous. And there are areas on the island that I think people will not be able to go into for 20 or 30 or 40 years, perhaps.
But it's not the last the Royal Engineers have seen of the Falklands. Because of the hundreds of mines still buried on the islands, they can expect to be working there for several years to come.
Some of the lessons of the Falklands War were being chewed over by political and military analysts at an international seminar in London this morning. The Argentines were invited but declined. However, on the Old Boy network,
deeply felt position by the President to enhance peace in the entire region.
I do believe that the initiative of President Reagan has opened the road for the Jordanian participation in order to achieve a meaningful solution for the Palestinian problem.
It's now known that 4 people died in the rioting in several Polish cities earlier this week. The authorities announced this evening that a man had been shot in Wrocław and later died in hospital. The men of the Royal Engineers have flown home to Brize Norton after performing one of the most dangerous and difficult tasks of the Falklands campaign. Not only did the sappers lose 2 men in the attack on Sir Galahad, but they suffered casualties during mine-clearing operations on the islands.
This was the last big homecoming from the Falklands. The men of 36 Engineer Regiment left on the QE2 early in May, and today their families were waiting to welcome them back. There was the familiar mixture of laughter and tears. And of course, the inevitable champagne to celebrate the end of a difficult and dangerous operation.
Well, it was only really when we got into Stanley that we realised that the Argentines had laid an enormous number of minefields in and around Stanley, some of which were marked, but a lot of which were unmarked and unrecorded. And of course, they were using plastic mines, which are undetectable with the equipment we've got at the moment.
How safe is the island now, then?
Not safe at all. I mean, in the process of clearing mines, 3 of my soldiers had feet blown off. 1 Argentine prisoner that was helping us had his foot blown off. Really, in the last week, we've had an armoured bulldozer destroyed on an anti-tank mine. And the whole area, particularly in and around Stanley, is extremely dangerous. And there are areas on the island that I think people will not be able to go into for 20 or 30 or 40 years, perhaps.
But today, the fact that many of them may have to go back to the Falklands was forgotten in the celebration of their safe return.
2 aircraft carriers, Invincible in the background and the new carrier Illustrious in the foreground, have steamed together in the South Atlantic while changing Falklands duty. As they sailed close, the crews of the 2 ships cheered and waved to each other. Invincible is on her way home from the islands with Prince Andrew on board. She'll arrive in Portsmouth on September the 17th. The introduction of lay visitors into police stations to be observers, as proposed by the Scarman inquiry, would be both an intrusion and an embarrassment. That's the warning from the country's senior police officers, which came at their annual conference in Preston. David Davis reports.
More than 100 senior officers attending this conference knew before they arrived the government was seriously considering Lord Scarman's recommendation. A decision is expected later this year. At a news conference, the senior officers' spokesman denied they opposed lay visitors on principle, but prisoners might not want them, the courts might have to hear evidence from them, and policemen would consider their presence an intrusion.
Oh, they would do. I'm speaking from my experience as an investigating officer, and it's an accepted practice that if an officer is interrogating, there's a virtual notice on the door, keep out, and that even applies to chief constables. No chief constable worth his salt would walk into an office where an interrogation is going on, because your mere intrusion would upset the continuity of the issue. So, yes, it could be, I think that could be objectionable. And after all, we are here, are we not, to maintain law and order and to bring people to book, and yet our hands are being tied in yet, or likely to be tied in yet another direction.
As the senior officers headed for home, they said they'd now wait for the government's proposals, but they stressed they'd nothing to hide.
A woman in her 60s was shot in the neck during a bank raid in Clacton in Essex today, and a security guard was also injured. 2 men carrying handguns attacked security guards at the bank. A number of shots were fired, and the woman was caught in the crossfire. Her condition is described as comfortable. The armed men grabbed a bag containing £25,000. As they left the bank, a passerby tried to catch one of them, but they got away in a car. The police are trying to trace the passerby. Barclays Bank have offered a £10,000 reward. The police have offered full descriptions of the men they want to question. Dozens of micro-light aircraft have set off on the international London to Paris race, taking a route similar to the pioneering air races of 70 years ago. The spate of fatal accidents in micro-light planes this year has showed that the competitors are facing the same kind of dangers as the early flyers. Mark Austin reports.
It's the first cross-channel race in a sport still very much in its infancy. The French are dominating the event, making up most of the 70 entries, but there are also 2 Americans and 7 from this country. Microlights are a cheap form of flying. You can pick one up for as little as £2,000, and in Britain the sport is booming. But it's also dangerous. This year alone, 8 people have been killed in accidents in this country. And last week, one make of microlight, the Scorpion, was grounded because of its bad safety record. Microlight enthusiasts hope events like this and new licensing regulations will help improve the image. At the off, the bird-like machines lifted into the air one after another, or at least most did. There's 4 stages to the race, and first stop was Lydd on the Kent coast, although already there's been at least 6 forced landings. Some, however, arrived in style, and this evening they're off across the channel to Le Touquet, then on to Pontoise tomorrow, before the final hopeful descent to Paris on Sunday.
The Prince and Princess of Wales interrupted their holiday at Balmoral today to return to London. It was for a happy occasion, the wedding of one of the Princess's closest friends, her former flatmate, Caroline Pride. The ceremony was at the Old Church in Chelsea. Clive Ferguson reporting.
There were some similarities to another wedding 13 months ago. The sun shone, the press were there in force. Even the public, though there were fewer of them, were, for the most part, there to see the same couple they'd seen last July. The guests of honour today, the Prince and Princess of Wales. They entered the church quickly, pausing only for the Princess to kiss the groom's brother. Last year, Caroline Pride, now Mrs. William Bartholomew, had helped keep the secret of her flatmate's royal romance. Today, the Prince and Princess stayed in the background as much as they could and tried to avoid becoming the centre of attention. There were congratulatory kisses, but it wasn't clear if the Princess was able to pass on any friendly words of marital advice to her friend before she left.
The main points of the news once again. The TUC wants every trade unionist to strike for an hour in support of the health workers. Dennis Healey has warned that the whole Western banking system could face collapse, but share prices in London have shot up again late this afternoon. And some victims of Idi Amin, the Asians expelled to Britain, have been offered compensation at last. Michael Burke will be here at 9 o'clock, but that's all from me, so I wish you a pleasant weekend.
Good evening too. Well, we'll all see a change in the weather as we go through the weekend. This cold front will work its way southwards, bringing a band of cloud and rain with it. That getting down, I think, to southern parts during Sunday. Then following in behind, we'll come into this somewhat cooler weather. Still be fairly bright, though, but with some showers about. But let's look at tonight's weather first of all. And a fairly misty night in many places. A good deal of cloud over northern and western parts of the country with a little bit of rain and drizzle about. And some of this cloud will be working its way eastwards, getting into central parts of England as we go through the night. And I think on the eastern side here, as temperatures drop down to about 11 centigrade, so we'll start to see some mist and fog forming, and some of those fog patches could be fairly dense. Nonetheless, I think they will be starting to clear away in the morning. Some of them could take a little bit of time before they finally go, but then over most of central and southern parts of England, much as today, I think a dry day, and it will brighten up. You'll get some sunshine and turn out quite warm in the afternoon. In the extreme west of England, though, northern parts of England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, another cloudy day with some rain and drizzle about, more persistent rain in Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland during the afternoon. That's it from me. Goodbye.
Now on BBC One, South East at 6.
Good evening. Fraud in the DHSS. Will the man of South East at 6? So from me, goodbye. See you soon.
Nostalgia is the keynote to Friday night on BBC1. At 6:50, the helicopter spies. The men from U.N.C.L.E. uncover yet another deadly plot to take over the world.
Somebody has won the race to develop a thermal prism.
At 9:25, those radio times. A look back to the first half of the 60 BBC years when wireless ruled the airwaves. At 10:50, it's back to 1962 for...
That was the year that was. They called it 62. Looked at in retrospect, all we can find to say is 62 to you too.
At 11:40, the late film is Hornet's Nest, a World War II drama starring Rock Hudson as an American soldier rescued by an unusual group of children.
You're going to show us how to shoot these guns.
Nostalgic highlights of Friday night entertainment on BBC1.
And BBC One makes tracks now for Best of the West.
In days of yore, in Western lore, a man returned from Civil War. His heart beat pure beneath his vest. His name was Best, Best of the West. But not alone did he come home. His newfound bride was at his side, and with his boy who did protest, they all came west to live with me.
Yippee-ki-yi-yo, yippee-ki-yi-yay, give three mighty cheers. Yippee-ki-yi-yo, yippee-ki-yi-yay, for the Western pioneers.
And off they rode, this family, and man and wife. His boy makes three, it's through their deeds this land progressed. Hooray for Best, Best of the West.
An arresting performance in BBC Two's Rock Week is just getting going by the Police, recording their latest album on the Caribbean island of Montserrat.
Tomorrow is a really important day, because tomorrow breakfast television comes to the BBC. Admittedly, it's not in the morning. In fact, it's not until tea time. But that's why it's the Noel Edmonds Late Late Breakfast Show.
Breakfast with Edmonds, tomorrow evening at 6:35.
On BBC One now, the men from U.N.C.L.E. are in a spin halfway round the world as the helicopter spies.